I still remember the first time I noticed it. The way my daughter's eyes would linger just a little too long on my checkbook, the extra tightness in her smile when she asked if I could just sign these papers. It wasn't the frank, warm curiosity I'd grown used to when she was little, the kind that came with bedtime stories and scraped knee consolations. It was something else entirely, an almost professional interest in my finances masking itself as concern. At the time, I brushed it off. After all, I was grieving. Only 6 months had passed since my husband Mark passed away suddenly in his sleep. The house felt emptier than ever, and maybe it was natural for my children to step forward, odd keen to ease my burden. But something in the way my daughter Sarah said, "Mom, I just want to help you," felt less like an embrace and more like a transaction. It wasn't until a few weeks later, when I found a stack of bank statements hidden in my own desk drawer, that the full weight of what was happening crashed down on me. I'd signed a power of attorney document, something Sarah had pressed me to do during one of her visits, without reading the fine print. In my fog of grief, I saw it as an act of trust, a small thing that would make her life easier, so she said. But that single signature opened the door for her to transfer funds into her own account check balances without my knowledge and gradually assume control of our joint finances. I wish I could say I was completely innocent in all of this, that I was merely a lamb among wolves. The truth is, I made mistakes, big ones. I allowed my pain and my need for support to overshadow my common sense. I stopped paying attention to little red flags, the urgent phone calls about urgent legal questions, the whispered phone conversations that fell silent when I entered the room. Not long after, I learned from a local bank manager, someone my late husband and I had trusted for years, that nearly 20% of elder financial abuse cases in the US are initiated by family members or close friends, according to a 2023 Consumer Financial Protection Bureau report. That statistic hit me like a cold wave, 1 in 5. And here I was, part of that heartbreaking statistic. In the early days of recognizing what was happening, I felt trapped. I was constantly on edge, second-guessing every interaction. Was my son really only trying to help me review investment options? Or was he eyeing my retirement savings? When my granddaughter Charlotte came to visit with cheerful hugs and shy questions about my nest egg, I wondered if she'd been coached to distract me while someone slipped away with another signature. My home, once a sanctuary of laughter and family dinners, now felt like a theater of shadows. Then there was the fog. Some mornings I'd wake up convinced I'd dreamed the entire episode, the letters the bank notices, the urgent sighs of my children. Other days I'd feel a dull, heavy ache behind my eyes, as though my mind itself had been weighed down by grief and betrayal. I'd move through the house like a ghost setting the table, but forgetting my own plate, answering questions in a daze, and sometimes even nodding in agreement to things I didn't fully comprehend. It took time, too much time, to pull myself together. I reached out to a counselor who specialized in grief and elder care, and with her patient guidance I began to piece things back together. One of the first lessons she helped me see was that noticing these red flags doesn't make you paranoid, it makes you vigilant. In fact, research shows that many victims of financial exploitation have reported small warning signs for months, even years, before the full extent of the abuse becomes clear. Ignoring those signs to avoid rocking the boat or causing family drama only gives abusers more time to gain your trust and exploit your blind spots. So I learned a few practical strategies to reclaim my life and protect my fragile peace of mind. First, never sign anything in haste. If someone brings me papers to sign, no matter how urgent they claim the matter is, I now insist on reading every line. If that means asking them to come back tomorrow, I do it. And when they ask, "But why the delay?" I simply tell them I need time to think and mean it. Second, I keep meticulous records. Every bank statement, every investment update, every legal document goes into a labeled binder on my bookshelf. I make photocopies or scans immediately. And I don't hide these binders. They sit in plain sight, a deliberate gesture that says I am watching. My bank now sends me alerts for any transaction over $500, and I check them daily. Third, I rebuilt my support network beyond family. I joined a seniors civic group at the local community centre where I found friends who had gone through similar betrayals, sometimes at the hands of distant relatives, sometimes by those they had trusted most. We shared stories, resources, and referrals to elder law attorneys, to financial advisors who specialize in protecting assets even to each other when we needed a shoulder to cry on. In retrospect, I realize my greatest mistake was letting my grief close off my usual curiosity. I used to be thorough, Mark, and I had always tackled our household finances as a team, reading every statement together, debating every decision. But after he died, I let my guard down. I gave my children the benefit of the doubt, assuming that blood would be stronger than money. And for a while that trust was enough to mask what was really happening. Today, when my daughter Sarah asks if I need help balancing my checkbook, I smile and say, "Thank you, sweetheart. But I've got it covered." I don't mean to sound cold. I still love her fiercely. But I've learned that love isn't about blind faith. It's about mutual respect and sometimes setting firm boundaries. When she nodded, a little disappointed but understanding, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I wish I could say that everything is perfect, now that the ghost of that betrayal has vanished completely. But memory is a stubborn thing. Sometimes, when the house is quiet, I can still hear the echo of hidden phone calls, the rustle of papers being shuffled just out of sight. But those moments don't paralyze me anymore. Now when I notice that old tightening in my chest, I reach for my notebook instead, the one where I jot down every odd request and every unexplained financial move, and I bring it with me to my next meeting with my attorney or my financial planner. What I want you to take away from my story is this. Watching for the subtle shifts in behavior, keeping records, and insisting on reading before signing, these aren't small acts. They are powerful defenses. They say, I remain here fully present, fully aware. And in that awareness lies the seed of self-respect, which no one, no matter how close, can take away. So if you've ever felt that pang in your gut when someone you love shows a sudden keen interest in your assets, trust that feeling. You don't need to accuse them of wrongdoing, just pause. Step back and give yourself time and space to protect what's rightfully yours. Because if nothing else, grief may cloud your heart, but vigilance can clear your mind. And in that clarity, you'll find the strength to reclaim your life. And now, as we move on to explore the legal tools and financial strategies that can further safeguard your independence. Remember this? The first step toward freedom is knowing you have the right to say, "Not yet," even to those you love most. Let's turn that page and see what comes next. When I finally shook off the fog of betrayal and grief, I knew I needed tools, concrete, reliable tools to rebuild my sense of safety. Hearing my counselor describe legal instruments like trusts and powers of attorney felt like discovering hidden keys to doors I never knew existed. Over the next few months, I became a diligent student of elder law and personal finance. In the process, I learned that knowing your options is the first step toward true independence and peace of mind. My first encounter was with the concept of a living trust. I'd always assumed that wills were the primary way to pass assets down to heirs. But as I met with attorney Linda Chen, I learned that a revocable living trust accomplishes something more powerful. It allows you to name yourself as trustee today, retaining full control over your property, while also naming a successor trustee to step in immediately when you can't. No probate court, no public filings, just a private, seamless transition. I'll never forget the day Linda sat me down at her polished oak conference table and walked me through a side-by-side comparison. With a will, she said gently, your estate must go through probate, a process that can take months and hundreds of attorney's fees. That process is public. Any curious neighbor can peek at your will once it's filed. With a revocable living trust, none of that happens. Your successor trustee can manage your affairs or distribute assets according to your instructions, all in private. The price tag for establishing the trust was higher than a simple will, roughly $2,500 in my county. But I viewed it as an investment in my privacy and autonomy. I watched Linda draft the document listing our home on Elm Street, my modest stock portfolio, even the proceeds from my late husband's life insurance. I named myself as trustee and our old family friend Carol as successor trustee. That meant, should anything happen to me, Carol could step in immediately to pay bills or care for my pets. No court-appointed guardians, no bureaucratic delays. A few weeks later, I heard about irrevocable trusts, a different animal entirely. My attorney explained that once you place assets into an irrevocable trust, you relinquish direct ownership. In return, those assets are generally protected from creditors and legal judgments. I thought with a shudder of how in the months after Mark passed, some distant cousin had threatened to sue, claiming he'd been unfairly overlooked in the inheritance. Although that claim was meritless, the shadow it cast reminded me that contested estates are never entirely hypothetical. Linda warned that irrevocable trusts are not for the faint-hearted. You give up control. You can't simply decide tomorrow. Oh, I want those stocks back. But for someone who worries about potential lawsuits or even about Medicaid eligibility, if long-term care becomes necessary, an irrevocable trust can be a strategic shelter. I decided to set aside a small parcel of our vacation cabin, about a 10-acre lot we rarely used, into an irrevocable trust. It was a way to test the waters without risking my primary residence. Seeing that investment grow within the protective shell of the trust, untouched by everyday creditors or the anxieties of probate, felt like wrapping a warm blanket of security around my shoulders. The next hurdle was the dreaded power of attorney, or POA. Having suffered abuse myself, I understood how easily a POA can be twisted into a weapon against the very person it's supposed to protect. In my case, I had signed a general POA without understanding that it granted sweeping authority over every aspect of my financial life. Now sitting with Mark's old friend Robert, an estate planning paralegal, I learned there are many flavors of POA, each designed for a specific purpose. There's a durable power of attorney for finances, which remains in effect even if you become incapacitated. A limited POA, which covers only particular tasks, perhaps selling a car or accessing a certain bank account. And a springing POA, which comes into effect only upon a specified event like a doctor's certification of incapacity. Robert advised me to scrap the overly broad POA I'd signed and replace it with a narrow, durable POA that named Carol as agent for finances, but limited her authority to manage only my investment account and my tax filings, nothing else. That afternoon, I watched Robert cross out paragraphs and meticulously type in new language. During the revision, I asked him, "What if I change my mind?" His answer was a revelation. I could revoke it any time, so long as I was of sound mind, simply by signing a revocation form and notifying my bank and any other institution relying on the POA. I felt a sense of agency return to me. No longer would I be left guessing about what authority I had signed away. Finally, there was the Advanced Healthcare Directive, sometimes called a living will. During one particularly reflective session, my friend Carol and I met with Dr. Eleanor Martinez, a geriatrician who counseled patients on end-of-life planning. This document, Dr. Martinez said, ensures your wishes for medical care. CPR ventilator support, Pain management are honored when you cannot communicate. Without it, decisions fall to family members, and we've seen too many conflicts arise when children disagree on what mum would have wanted. I realized that while financial control was crucial, I had also neglected my voice over my own body. I remembered how during Mark's final days, the hospital staff had urged aggressive interventions I wasn't sure he would have wanted. In that haze, I could only pray someone else would make the right call. Now I wanted to make it explicit. No feeding tube, if my brain function was irreversibly compromised. Yes to hospice care, if quality of life was gone, and certainly no experimental treatments that would leave me tethered to machines without hope of recovery. Together, Carol and I filled out the directive, selecting a healthcare agent, her, and listing a backup, our neighbour Elaine. We discussed scenarios. Would I prefer to pass quietly at home, surrounded by lavender-scented pillows? Absolutely. Did I wish to receive all possible life-sustaining treatments? Only if a reasonable chance of meaningful recovery existed. Dr. Martinez witnessed our signatures provided the required notary service, and we walked away feeling lighter for the first time I felt in control of my final chapter. When I looked back on the journey of that summer, I realized how each tool serves a unique purpose, yet they all interlock to form a robust framework of protection. Revocable living trust for seamless transfer privacy and protection from probate. Irrevocable trust for asset protection against lawsuits or Medicaid spend down. Durable POA. Limited for day-to-day financial tasks when you can't manage them yourself. Advanced Healthcare Directive. To have the final say on medical decisions. I made a simple chart in my journal. One column for each instrument. One row for factors like control, privacy, cost, flexibility, and protection level. Seeing it laid out helped me understand that I was not forced to choose one. In fact, I needed them all, each covering gaps the others left open. My conversations with attorneys and doctors also surfaced a few common mistakes that people make when assembling their own protective toolkit. Not updating documents regularly. I learned that trusts and POAs aren't set it and forget it. Life changes. Marriage, divorce, birth of grandchildren, relocation across state lines can render your documents outdated or invalid. I now review my entire estate plan every 2 years, or immediately after any major life event. Failing to communicate your plan. A trust or directive hidden in a file cabinet serves no one if your successor trustee or healthcare agent can't find it. I created an estate plan binder marked clearly on the top shelf of my study and gave copies to both Carol and Elaine, as well as my financial advisor and family lawyer. Choosing the wrong agent. Too many people name the person they think should be the agent, often the oldest child rather than the person who is most responsible and trustworthy. I saw that firsthand when my sister's POA document named her eldest son, only to have him sell the family home against her wishes. Choose someone friend, niece, cousin who demonstrates integrity and competence, even if it feels unconventional. Overlooking state requirements. Each state has its own rules for notarization, witnessing, and form language. My initial POA was invalid in Florida because I hadn't adhered to that state's witness requirements. Now I consult my lawyer anytime I move or spend extended time in another state. Putting these legal defenses in place did more than protect my assets. It transformed my sense of self-worth. I wasn't just an aging widow vulnerable to exploitation. I was a woman asserting her right and shaping her own destiny. Not long after finalizing my documents, I traveled with Carol to our cabin in northern Georgia. As we sat on the porch, watching the hummingbirds sip from the feeder, I shared the full scope of my estate plan with her. The gratitude in her eyes, knowing she could help if I needed her, confident she wouldn't be forced into an impossible choice, sealed our trust in a new way. When friends ask me today, should I bother with all of that legal fuss? I tell them, imagine driving across the country without roadside assistance, knowing your car could break down at any moment. That's what life feels like without these instruments in place. It's not paranoia, it's empowerment. So, if you're listening, if you've ever felt that flutter of unease when someone close to you insists on handling your affairs, know that you have options. You don't have to navigate this alone. Reach out to a qualified elder law attorney, find a trusted friend or professional to serve as agent, and commit to regular reviews of your plan. Because peace of mind isn't given. It's built, document by document, conversation by conversation. And once those doors are locked tight, you can step forward into the next chapter of your life with courage, knowing that whatever storms may come, you have the keys in your own hand. As we turn the page to explore how to rediscover our passions and rebuild our sense of self beyond roles and titles, remember, true freedom is not simply the absence of threat, but the presence of choice. Let's see how we can embrace that choice in the days ahead. I never imagined that at 62, I would be sitting in a crowded community college computer lab wrestling with the simplest of mouse clicks. Yet there I was, heart pounding, palms sweaty as I stared at the glowing cursor blinking innocently on the desktop screen. Just 3 months earlier, I could barely turn on my phone. Now I was learning to navigate email cloud storage and even the basics of photo editing software. It all started one rainy afternoon when I bumped into my neighbor Marisol, carrying a sleek DSLR camera almost bigger than her purse. She was heading to a digital photography for seniors workshop at the local cultural center. And on impulse, maybe it was the weather, or maybe it was the restlessness in my spirit, I asked if I could join her. The instructor, a soft-spoken man named Tyler, welcomed me with the warmth of someone who knew that intention mattered more than experience. Before long, I was snapping photos of rain-drenched cobblestone streets, the glint of droplets on rose petals, and the distant silhouette of mountains shrouded in mist. I felt a spark I hadn't felt since my 30s, when I first learned to ride horses on our farm in Virginia. The simple act of framing a shot of chasing the perfect light stirred something deep within me. It reminded me that creativity isn't reserved for the young, it's a lifelong pulse waiting to be tapped. For decades, I had defined myself by the roles I played. Daughter, wife, mother, farm manager. Each title carried its own set of obligations and expectations. When my husband David passed away 5 years ago, those roles unraveled all at once. I realized with a jolt that I hadn't asked myself, who am I beyond these labels? Sitting in that photography workshop surrounded by other seniors with cameras hanging from their necks, I saw reflections of myself, people who had spent a lifetime caring for others, now daring to turn the lens back on their own passions. There was Gloria, a retired nurse who snapped hauntingly beautiful portraits of stray cats. There was Marcus, an ex-accountant whose still-life compositions of fruit baskets rivaled professional studio shoots. In one session, Tyler encouraged us to create a personal photo project, a visual diary of the things we hold dear. My first assignment was deceptively simple. Capture an image that represents hope. I wandered the garden. The sky was overcast, but the daffodils still stood tall. Their yellow heads bowed in the drizzle. I knelt, zoomed in, and pressed the shutter. Later, when I saw that photo, tiny flowers glowing defiantly against the grey sky, I felt a surge of optimism I hadn't realized I'd lost. But rediscovering a passion is one thing. Believing you belong in that new world is another. At first, I felt awkward among students half my age, breezing through menus and filters at lightning speed. Just keep practicing, Gloria advised me one afternoon over coffee. I'm 72 and I still fumble every time I update my software. The secret is we all fumble. Her words stuck with me. I decided to apply that same lesson of gentle persistence to other areas where I'd let fear hold me back. For years, I'd avoided driving on highways, too many unsettling memories of near misses, too many reminders of my advancing age. Yet autonomy in mobility was one of the first casualties when I retreated into widowhood. One crisp autumn morning, I signed up for an adult driving course. The instructor, a young man named Derek, greeted me at the wheel of a bright red sedan. "We'll take it slowly," he assured. Seatbelt on. My hands trembled as I buckled up. The engine purred, and for a moment I remembered the thrill of learning to drive at 18. We practiced lane changes and merges on a quiet stretch of road. My foot hovered over the accelerator like it might bite me. My knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. But Derek's calm voice guided me. Signal left check mirrors, ease onto the gas, and before I knew it, that we were cruising at 55 miles per hour, the wind whipping through the open window. I laughed aloud, the sound soaring above the hum of tires. By day's end, Derek handed me a certificate of completion. "You did it," he said, grinning. And I realized I had done more than learn a technical skill. I had reclaimed a piece of myself that I thought was gone forever. Encouraged by my little victories, I turned back to technology and enrolled in a digital literacy for seniors class at the local library. I learned to create and manage email accounts, participate in online forums, and even video chat with my granddaughter Amelia in California. The first time I saw her face light up on my computer screen, hearing her shout, "Grandma across the miles," I felt a level of connection that letters and phone calls could never match. As I grew more comfortable online, I joined a few Facebook groups for senior hobbyists, one for gardeners, another for amateur photographers, and a third devoted to memoir writing. These virtual communities became lifelines, offering encouragement, troubleshooting tips, and sometimes just a friendly chat on a lonely afternoon. I began posting my daffodil photograph and sharing anecdotes about my late husband's love of spring blooms. Responses poured in beautiful shot. "You've captured hope perfectly. Thank you for sharing your story." In fact, according to a 2022 Pew Research Center study, more than 40% of Americans aged 65 and older now go online daily, and many cite social media as a key factor in combating loneliness and maintaining mental agility. Knowing I was part of that wave made me feel both connected and empowered. Of course, the path wasn't all roses. There were moments when frustration threatened to swallow my enthusiasm. I once spent an entire afternoon trying to install a simple photo filter plugin, only to discover I had downloaded the wrong version. My patience frayed. I was halfway to throwing the laptop out the window when I remembered Derek's words. "Take a step back. Breathe. Come back later." So I closed the lid, made myself a cup of chamomile tea, and returned 30 minutes later with a clearer head. That small pause saved me hours of anxiety. I've come to think of it as the senior strategy. Whenever you feel stuck, step away before you break something, even if it's just your spirit. Another mistake I narrowly avoided was overcommitting. Enthusiasm can be contagious, and before long I was eyeing woodworking courses, Tai Chi classes, and even a spoken word poetry workshop. But my counselor at the community center reminded me that depth often trumps breadth. "Pick one or two things you really care about," she said, "and devote your energy there." I chose to focus on photography and driving, two areas that promised both personal fulfillment and practical independence. Looking back on the last year, I see how each small triumph, sending that first emails, framing my daffodils at dawn, merging onto the freeway, built on the last, creating a ladder of confidence. I no longer define myself solely by the roles I once played. Now I introduce myself as Eleanor Photographer, Chauffeur, Digital Explorer, titles that bring a smile to my face. If my story teaches anything, it's that the golden years need not be a sunset of retreat and decline. They can be a dawn of rediscovery. Embrace learning. Sign up for that class you're curious about, even if your hands shake a little at first. Celebrate small wins. Every new skill mastered is a victory over self-doubt. Build community. Find your tribe online or in person and share your progress failures too. Practice patience. When frustration rises, take a break. The solution often comes when you step away. Focus your energy. It's tempting to chase every possibility, but true growth often comes from sustained effort in one or two areas. So here I am at 63, with my camera over my shoulder and my car keys in my purse, ready for whatever comes next. The world feels wide open again, filled with undiscovered corners, begging to be captured. Highways, waiting to be explored, and keystrokes that connect me to loved ones across oceans. And if you're sitting there wondering whether you're too old to start something new, let me tell you, this curiosity and courage don't come with an expiration date. They're gifts you can unwrap at any age, just as long as you're willing to take that first step. Click that mouse and point that lens toward the horizon. Because on the other side of fear lies freedom, and on the other side of doubt lies discovery. Let's keep climbing. When the idea first took shape in my mind, it was almost accidental. I had gone out to the farm one crisp spring morning to check on the new grape shoots, and I caught sight of Ansel, our longtime foreman, leaning against the barn door with a thoughtful expression. He tipped his weathered straw hat and waved me over. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I've been thinking about what you said last week about honoring the people who tend these vines." I remembered that afternoon's conversation well. Over coffee on the porch, I had confessed my fear that selling off more land or handing control entirely to outside investors would erase the community we'd built together. The idea of a cooperative had come out almost as a whisper, an untested notion that the workers themselves might become co-owners of the farm, sharing both risk and reward. Now, hearing Ansel's words set something alight in me. "Tell me what you've been thinking," I said, sitting on a nearby bale of hay. He shifted his weight. "They say cooperatives work well up in Mendocino in Northern California. Small vineyards banding together so each family has a stake. It's not charity. It's business, ma'am. We'd have a board. Generate profits, pay ourselves, plow back into the land." I nodded slowly, picturing the men and women who came at dawn and left at dusk, their hands keenly attuned to the vines as if they could sense every shift in sap and sun. They were the ones who knew this land, not a distant investor. That afternoon, I called Linda, my estate lawyer, and asked if we could explore the cooperative model. Her name lit up on my caller ID with a spark of excitement I hadn't felt in years. "I've drafted a few outlines," before she said, "Let's set up a meeting with a cooperative specialist tonight." That evening, we gathered at the farmhouse kitchen table, me, Linda, Ansel, and a small group of senior workers, those who'd been with us from the first acre. We passed around steaming mugs of tea and chart paper. Ansel sketched a rudimentary org chart, a board of directors made up of worker members, a general manager, me, at least for the first year, and a partnership agreement with an outside investor to help with startup costs. "How much equity would each member hold?" I asked. Ansel tapped the pen against his lip. "We'd calculate based on years of service or hours worked in the last harvest season and contributions from pre-existing assets like the water rights each foreman helped secure decades ago. We split shares fairly so no one person controls a majority." Linda chimed in. "That's important. Democratic governance, one member, one vote, will protect against any internal consolidation of power." Over the next few weeks, we hammered out details in long, slow meetings after work. I wanted the process to be transparent. Every worker member received a binder of financial statements, projections for the coming year, and a glossary of accounting terms. Many had never held more than a check stub in their hands. Suddenly, they were reviewing balance sheets and profit and loss statements. One afternoon, Amelia, the woman who taught us to graft vines 30 years earlier, looked up from the binder. Her reading glasses perched on the tip of her nose. Eleanor, she said, her voice firm. I never thought I'd see accountants on our doorstep. But she paused to swallow hard. I do understand this. It's our home, after all. Hearing her affirmation, I felt tears sting my eyes. This was no longer just my decision. It was theirs. We knew we needed seed money for legal fees, initial cooperative training, and a small contingency fund. I reached out to Rudy Mendes, the Napa vintner, who had purchased the southern half of the farm without disrupting our operation. When I explained the cooperative idea, his eyes lit up. I've studied similar models in Europe, he said over the phone. If you structure the financing right, I can provide a low-interest loan that's subordinate to the cooperative's own liabilities. That means the cooperative gets first crack at repayments, and I'm okay with that arrangement. Having his support was a game-maker moment. His loan of $200,000 would fund the cooperative's initial capital needs equipment, refurbishing a small processing shed upgrade, educational workshops on governance, and a modest reserve for crop shortfalls. He insisted on no board seat and no equity. He only asked one condition, that we keep him posted on annual performance, so he could advise but not dictate. When I announced Rudy's commitment at our next meeting, the barn erupted in applause. Even the shyest of the workers' men, who rarely spoke up, clapped their heavy gloves together in approval. Next, we tackled governance. I hired a cooperative consultant named Marlene, who had helped small dairy farms transition in Wisconsin. In her customary gentle tone, she laid out the 7 Rochdale principles: voluntary membership, democratic control, limited returns on capital autarky education, cooperation among cooperatives, and concern for community. We agreed to a phased governance model: founding board, first year 5 members, 3 foremen elected by worker members, plus me as managing director and Marlene as consultant. General Assembly worker members would meet twice a year to approve budgets, elect board directors, and set strategic priorities. Stewardship Committee, a rotating group tasked with environmental practices, integrating organic methods, water conservation, and soil health. We held mock elections, so everyone understood the voting process. I was particularly insistent on 1 member, 1 vote, regardless of how many shares a person held. We didn't want landowners or founders to overpower newcomers. When election day came, I sat quietly near the back of the barn, turned polling station, and watched as ballot boxes filled with slips of paper bearing names like Ansel Rodriguez and Mary Gonzalez. The winner for board chair was Georgia, a woman in her early 60s, who had worked side by side with me in harvest heat and winter frost. She wiped her brow and shook hands with her fellow board members. I will do my best, she said, voice cracking. It wasn't just a victory for her. It was a triumph for every worker who had toiled alongside the vines for decades. As managing director, I installed accounting software and hired a part-time cooperative treasurer. Someone neither from my old team nor any of the workers, but an independent professional who would report directly to the board. Every month, the treasurer circulated simple, color-coded financial summaries: green for income, red for expenses, blue for capital investments. We also launched an intranet portal accessible from any of the new tablets provided to board members, where meeting minutes, financial dashboards, and project updates lived. For workers who preferred paper, we posted large print summaries on the break room bulletin board. One afternoon, a young vineyard hand named Isaac approached me, squinting at his tablet. "Ma'am, I'm not much of a computer guy, but I want to understand this," he said. We set aside time to go through the portal together and showed him how to zoom in on pie charts for revenue streams, wine sales, agritourism, events, bulk grape contracts. He walked away, beaming, telling colleagues he could now track every dollar. We did stumble at first. Our early production estimates were overly optimistic, and a late spring frost cut yields by 15%. Worker members panicked when they saw projected profits vanish. Some suggested scrapping the cooperative altogether and selling to the highest bidder. At that moment, Georgia convened an emergency meeting. She reminded everyone of our core values: resilience, shared risk, and long-term stewardship. We decided to tap into part of Rudy's contingency loan to cover operating losses, while we focused on marketing the limited harvest as a premium limited edition vintage. Surprising us all, the scarcity story sold out within weeks. That lesson, expect the unexpected, became baked into our bylaws. We established a minimum reserve of 10% of annual revenue to be replenished before any dividend payout. We also agreed on a rainy day vote. If yields drop below 80% of forecast, the membership automatically convenes to determine a course correction. 2 years into our cooperative experiment, I drove down the vineyard rows at dawn, the fog swirling around the trellises like drifting ghosts. I was 67 now, a different woman entirely from the one paranoid about hidden phone calls and secret documents. Here, in the glow of the sunrise, I saw Ansel and another foreman pruning side by side, while Georgia examined a cluster of grapes for ripeness. A sense of pride filled me so deeply I could have almost patted the vines themselves. This was more than a business model. It was a living, breathing community. I had built a structure that didn't just safeguard my own interests. It empowered dozens of families, honored generations of labor, and kept our land vibrant and productive. If anyone had told me 10 years ago that I'd one day preside over a cooperative winery, I might have laughed at the absurdity. Yet here it was proof that age and tradition need not be barriers to innovation and shared prosperity. Looking back, I see several cornerstones of our success: transparency in governance, simplified financial reporting, and open elections; community ownership, worker members with genuine stakes, not tokens; strategic partnerships; an investor who believed in our mission without dominating it; built-in resilience reserve funds, frost-ready bylaws, and a marketing strategy for lean years; education and engagement, training sessions, so every member could speak the language of finance and viticulture; and most of all, a willingness to listen to the whispers of Ansel, the suggestion of Georgia, the doubts of Isaac. It was a cooperative in every sense: the give and take, the shared responsibility, the collective triumphs and setbacks that knit us together more closely than any top-down ownership ever could. That evening, as I locked up the farmhouse and watched fireflies begin their slow dance among the vines, I whispered a quiet thank you to the land and the people who worked it. In their hands, this farm was no longer just an inheritance to be guarded. It was a legacy to be grown, nurtured, and shared. And as I drove back to my downtown Charlottesville home, I felt lighter than I had in years. My heart was full of gratitude for the journey, the lessons learned, and the bright future we were building together, one vine at a time. That crisp October afternoon, I was poring over the minutes of our most recent cooperative meeting when the phone rang. It was Lucy. My heart skipped. It had been nearly 2 years since she last visited, and our conversations had been polite, but distant. "Mum," she said, voice trembling just the slightest. "Can we meet? I'd like to talk about everything." I paused, my pen hovering above the page. "Of course, sweetheart. When tomorrow morning, if you're free?" 10 a.m., I replied, a calm settling over me. "Won't be too early." The next day, I arrived at our favorite cafe, small tables spilling onto the sidewalk, the smell of fresh brewed coffee mingling with autumn leaves. Lucy was already there, stirring her latte, eyes rimmed pink. When I sat down, she looked up and managed a shaky smile. "Thank you for doing this," she said. I've I've missed you. I squeezed her hand. Me too. For a long moment, silence held us. Finally, Lucy set down her cup and looked straight at me. I'm sorry, Mum. Not just for how we acted about the farm and the cooperative, but for how I never bothered to ask what you wanted. I assumed wrongly that I knew best. Her admission made the years of tension crystallize the secret meetings, the unspoken accusations, the court battles. And yet here it was, an opening. I reached across the table and pulled out a small notebook. I've done some thinking too, I said, about how we move forward. I want to share something with you. Page by page, I walked her through a simple 3-part family manifesto. I had drafted values: first, respect, honesty, and listening. Communication ritual. A quarterly family council. No more surprises, no more secrets. Shared legacy. Defining not just assets, but memories, traditions, and dreams. Lucy read in silence, tears welling. I love this, she whispered. But I'm scared. I don't want to hurt you again. Which is why we start small, I said. Will you help me plan our first council? Just you and me and maybe Charles on a video call? She nodded, relief and hope mingling on her face. A week later, on a crisp Saturday morning, I set up my living room for our inaugural family council. The coffee table held printed agendas, colourful markers, and a tray of pastries. Lucy sat on the couch, and on the screen of my laptop, I could see Charles grey at the temples, yet his eyes wary but curious. Michael was offline for work, but he'd sent his regrets and a promise to join next time. I opened with a simple check-in. One word to describe how you're feeling, Lucy said, cautious. Charles said optimistic. I said grateful. Even in our brevity, something shifted, the tension eased by the ritual of honest sharing. Next, we reviewed the family manifesto, refining the language together. Charles pointed out that shared legacy should include our grandchildren's voices. Lucy suggested adding a time capsule component, where each person contributes a letter or photo to be opened in 10 years. We laughed at the thought of predictions about our future selves. When we reached the item about assets and values, I guided them through my vision for the remaining half of the farm, a conservation easement to protect the land with the option for family retreats or educational workshops led by the cooperative. The goal was not inheritance of money, but inheritance of purpose. I know you all have your own lives, careers, families, kids, I said. I want this farm to belong not just to me, but to the community we built and to the ideals we share: stewardship, sustainability, and connection. Charles nodded slowly. I never thought of it that way, he admitted. I was so focused on dollars and titles that I forgot about roots. Lucy reached for his hand on the keyboard. We're sorry, Mum. We're learning. I felt my heart swell. Me too. Outside of family dynamics, I also wanted to leave a layered living legacy, one that reflected not only land and finances, but also knowledge, relationships, and community impact. Over the next month, I set to work on 3 interlocking initiatives. The Eleanor Vance Fellowship, a small scholarship fund for young viticulture students who demonstrate commitment to sustainable agriculture. I contacted my old alma mater, the University of Virginia's School of Architecture and Design, which recently launched an environmental studies program. They agreed to administer a yearly grant in my name. The Story Circle Project, gathering oral histories from veteran cooperative members, translating their memories, recipes, songs, and harvest anecdotes into a digital archive. I teamed up with a local librarian, Maria, who provided recording equipment and a dedicated website. Mentorship Mondays, a monthly virtual meetup where I, along with members of the cooperative, offer guidance to aspiring senior entrepreneurs. Whether they dream of a small urban farm, a crafts business, or an online gallery. I sent invitations, flyers, and press releases. The response surprised me within weeks. The fellowship received its first 2 applicants from California and Oregon. The Story Circle podcast had 50 listeners tuning in, and Mentorship Mondays averaged 20 live participants, many of whom shared stories of reclaiming their own lives later in age. In building these programs, I made a few missteps. I'd like to spare you. Overcommitting resources. At first, I earmarked too large a portion of the scholarship fund, leaving little for administrative costs. I had to later scale back slightly and enlist volunteers to handle logistics, neglecting emotional needs. I assumed everyone in the cooperative would want to contribute to the story circle. In reality, some members were reluctant, guarded about having their voices recorded. I learned to offer choice paper journal entries, anonymous submissions, or on-camera interviews, respecting each person's comfort level. Forgetting long-term sustainability, I nearly overlooked the need for an endowment to keep Mentorship Mondays running after I'm gone. I corrected that by establishing an ongoing partnership with a local nonprofit that agreed to co-sponsor future sessions. 6 months into these projects, I found myself at the cooperative's annual harvest celebration. The long barn was decked in fairy lights. Children chased fireflies outside. Neighbours sampled our wine and asked questions at the fellowship information table. I spotted Lucy and Charles chatting animatedly with scholarship hopefuls. I saw cooperative members huddled around Maria's laptop, listening to their own stories broadcast through the Story Circle podcast. As I sipped my glass of our latest vintage, I realized how far we'd come from bitter court trials to warm community feasts. The farm, once threatened by the greed of my own offspring, now stood stronger than ever, not as a battleground for inheritance, but as a living testament to collaboration. That evening, I raised my glass at the close of the celebration. To roots and wings, I declared, voice ringing through the rafters. To legacy in every sense, land, love, and laughter. May we continue to grow together and apart, always remembering where we came from and daring to dream where we're going. Back in my Charlottesville home that night, I sat at my desk and opened the family binder. On its first page was the signed family manifesto. Behind it lay council notes, copies of fellowship applications, and the first-hand transcripts of Story Circle interviews. I ran my finger down the list of programs, 3 initiatives, 1 cooperative, and a family rediscovered. I knew the work would never be finished. Families change, communities evolve, and the land will bear new challenges, climate shifts, market fluctuation, generational shifts. But I took comfort in the structures we'd built. The periodic councils, the scholarship endowment, the oral history archive, the mentorship network. They weren't just projects, they were living systems designed to flex and adapt long after I'm gone. And as I closed the binder, I whispered a final promise to myself. No matter what happens, joy or heartbreak, growth or loss, this legacy will stand guided by the values we chose. My life is not defined by a single role or title, but by the connections I've nurtured and the seeds I've planted. I switched off the lamp and stepped out onto my terrace. The night air was cool and the city lights twinkled in the valley below. Somewhere an owl called. I thought of my children wherever they were, of the grandchildren, the cooperative members, the students I'd never meet. We were all threads in a tapestry still unfolding, and in that moment I felt profoundly, deeply content. Not because everything was perfect, but because I had redefined legacy on my own terms. A tapestry of assets and aspirations, of family bonds and community spirit, woven together by respect, honesty, and hope. That was the true inheritance I would leave behind, one that no lawyer, no court, no bitter dispute could ever take away.